1, 2, 1, 2.
Testing. Testing.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah, what's up with that?
I
Huh?
don't know, but that one drives me. It's just
I know.
bright.
Yeah.
It's a different
Strange
bulb.
place to be right there.
We tried to move it. Doesn't go far.
Now, Becky just grabbed your spot. Just push her over.
Well, there's that row too, I guess. At one point yesterday, I don't think there was a seat. I was like, oh. Maybe ask the ones behind. Either the two
Ready?
behind or
Ankle jump. Good morning. Welcome to this second and last day of the 2018 Annual Overcoming Racism Conference. We are your FREC MCs. I am Tim.
And I'm Deb.
We are glad you are here for this morning's performance and discussion, followed by your choice of afternoon workshop sessions. Go ahead.
In addition to the grounding of our opening ceremony, we remind you to reach out to each other, talk, to listen, and to learn. If anything you experience or hear makes you uncomfortable, please support one another by talking about it rather than allowing your feelings or yourself to feel invisible or disconnected.
With gratitude to the Dakota people on whose homeland we stand, we again begin the second day of the 2018 Overcoming Racism Conference with the drum, with Virgil Mountain and Shannon Timms Bassett, whom I shall introduce in a moment. As we did yesterday, we also wish to express our sympathy and our sense of shared loss with the death of Virgil's daughter and Shannon's stepdaughter, Marissa, who has blessed us with dance in the past at this conference. And also Dr. Cecil Whitehat, who for many years blessed us with sage to begin this conference and who also just recently died. The drum is the heartbeat of Mother Earth. The drum beats, and the beats of human heart, when once aligned, flow with the rhythm of all of life, in meter with the universe, with the sustaining heart of the Creator. For the Dakota people, the beat of the drum is a healer, transformer, transmitter of spiritual messages. The drum unites us all here into one heart, one being. The repetitions within the song signify attention to the sacred directions east, south, west, and north. For some of us, the drum is a relative, a grandfather to whom we listen with respect. In reverence on hearing the drum, the heartbeat of Mother Earth, we stand and remove our hats. It is now my honor to introduce Virgil and Shannon to lead us this morning.
Testing 1, 2. Can everybody hear me? Good morning. Hihani washte. Well, tatanka kichita me ake cham. Well, chanshoya pi oyate emata hado cham. Well, Hakichita tuahe emata handoa chalo. I want to say good morning again and thank each and every one of you for coming and participating. My spirit name is Tatanka Akichita, which in our language, our Dakota language, means buffalo warrior. It was a name that was given to me by the Spirit Nation. My Euro-American name is Virgil Blacklance, which means, like I always, it doesn't mean anything. So, kind of gives you a sense of, where we fit in America. But today, we're going to kind of keep it short, sweet, specific, and to the point. We want to showcase our jingle dress dancer here, Shannon. It's a healing dress. It is part of our ceremonial way of life. And we want to bless each and every one of you with the power of this dress. And so that it can clear your minds, we can become one. And after this first song, they have asked me to talk just a little bit about the Dakota 38 Memorial Ride that my daughter, our daughter here, was a part of for so many years. So we'll get going. Well, our uncle looks on. Let's give Shannon a round of applause. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit. You guys can go ahead and sit down if you'd like. One of the old teachings that our people have had is when we obtain a sacred bundle, these bundles are put in a teepee. Yeah, they're put in a teepee, and what they've done is from the center of the teepee down, there's a rope that hangs. We tie these sacred bundles and they hang because it represents the existence, that fifth dimension between this earth and wherever it is that we come from. And throughout history, it tells us that this is the reason why we stand when we are honoring something, because our mind and our hearts are halfway between this earth and that where. And a lot of people, they don't understand a lot of the historical purposes of why we do things. So I just wanted to share that little bit with you. We look up here, we look at my daughter, Marissa, who was part of the 38 Dakota Riders. She participated in this ride for many years. And our chief, Orville Looking Horse, who is the keeper of the sacred white buffalo calf pipe and sacred bundle, had appointed my daughter as a spirit horse keeper for the ride. And there was not very many other young people, or even older people for that matter, that was able to obtain that right to touch this horse and to be able to take care of this horse. And my daughter, for some reason, and the funny thing about it is that she never asked. She just went and she did it. I believe one of the stories was that the spirit horse was kind of fidgeting and agitated, and Marissa went over and she just took control, and our chief was standing off to the side, and he decided to just kind of stand and watch her and observe her and how she interacted with this spirit horse. And she got him to calm down. She got him to be controlled. And there was a connection there that my brother had seen, I guess. And so from that point on, it wasn't even him, but the spirit people that said that she is the one that is to take care of this person. And kind of like, throughout history, a lot of our teachings have been stolen and placed into different parts of religion and even movies. Because if you take this theory that I'm talking about now, and you look at the movie Avatar, and you see that the connection between their braids and the horses that kind of combine as what it is, Even Grandpa Wallace Black Elk, who used to live years and years ago, there were white settlers that came and they sat down and talked with this medicine person about all of the spiritual life experiences that he had. And they went and they made a book, and they made lots of money off of what he shared with them. And he still lived in a trailer, one bedroom broken down trailer on the reservation. But these people got rich off of what he did. Same with echinacea. There was a medicine person that shared that medicine with somebody, and in turn they went and they got rich off of it. So this is kind of how it goes, but in the history of our 38 Dakotas, there are many tragedies in this country that are taking place now. But we look at Nevada, we look at the schools, and we look at all of these tragic things that are happening in our country. To date, the mass hanging of over 150 Dakotas is still the largest mass execution in U.S. history. And it is commemorated with this ride, the 38 Dakota ride, that these warriors and both men and women participate in. The very last time I seen my daughter was on this ride. I was called by a friend of mine to come to the campsite where the riders were going to come into. And he asked me, he said, "Virgil, can you build this sacred fire?" He said, "The riders are coming." And I told him, I said, "Yeah, I can do that." When I built the fire, the riders were had stopped some ways, miles down the road, and then waiting, kind of burnt off a lot of the wood waiting for them, but a car come driving down the road. When that car stopped, my daughter got out. She came over and she says, "Hi, Dad." I gave her a hug and I told her, I said, "Get in the car." And she got in the car. She still had her face mask on. And she said, "I can't feel my toes and my fingers." She says, "I can't feel my fingers." So I had her take off her gloves, and I had my hand and I was rubbing her fingers, and I turned the heat on. But this is the sacrifice that, and I mentioned to her, I said, "You're cold." I said, maybe you should just kind of take a break. And she said, "Dad," she said, "this is the sacrifice that I make for my people." And not just for my people, all of us. Today, we are fighting for this particular commemoration, you know. And history teaches us through right around this time, and in the winter time is when Dakota people, we start teaching our young ones orally our history. So history teaches us that when a lot of our Dakota people were rounded up after a battle, the Battle of Birch Coulee, the Battle of Wood Lake, and the United States government came and they rounded us up. They put us on barges and boats that went up and down the Mississippi River until they collaborated with the Catholic Church and to find out what they were going to do with us. When that time came, in the meantime, we weren't fed food, water. They threw us rations, a lot of the pork rinds that were a lot of salt in them, so we got thirsty. A lot of our people would makeshift buckets that would drip over the side of the boat, and they would fill it up with the river water, pull it back up, and they would drink that water. But that water was poisonous. A lot of our people got sick and they died. And the military people that were assigned to watch over us, when somebody was passed away, they would take this body and they would drag it over to the center, and they would kick that body off the side of the boat. And the march of the 38 Dakotas that were found guilty of surviving, they were marched from Granite Falls area down to Fort Snelling over here, passing through St. Peter, Minnesota. The people of that town received word that these Indians were going to come through this town, and they gathered. The military and that come through had all of these Dakota people that were marching. History tells us that at one point there was a young white woman that was angry, outraged, and she ran out and she stripped a baby from a woman's arms, and by the legs swung and slammed that baby against the wall, and her head splattered open. Nothing was ever done to this woman. This is the kind of trauma that a lot of us go through, a lot of our people go through. If you look at this picture of my daughter, like Shannon said yesterday, when she was about 6, 7 years old, we received a phone call from the elementary school. It says, "Hey, we have your daughter down here in the principal's office." I said, "Oh, geez, what'd she do?" "Well, she refused to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag," she said. I said, "Okay." We brought her home. She told me, she says, "Dad, I didn't stand because that's not my flag. That flag doesn't represent me or my family or my people." So what we did was we explained to her the history of this flag. And in the Battle of Little Bighorn, this flag was captured and rightfully belonged to us. Through battle, the United States was defeated. But because of how compassionate our people are, we had ceremony. We smudged this flag off with reverence, with respect. We folded it up. A delegation of Dakota leaders and Lakota leaders approached Washington, and we presented this flag back to you. Since then, over half of our people enlisted in the military to fight for this country, to fight for you. A lot of our wars and the freedoms that we have today come from our people, the code talkers that won the war for us and then never acknowledged, as a matter of fact, disgraced and discriminated against them and made fun of them by the President of the United States. You look at this powerful picture back here, it is the same battle that we fight today. The water that we drink. And there's more that goes along with this. But I know we just wanted to kind of share that much. I know we don't want to take up too much time. But it's something that we want to share. Today, we are gathered here to find out a little bit about overcoming racism. And last night, I pondered through prayer and talking with Shannon and some other of our people. And I'm going to share just a little brief part of that after this next song, but I want to sing an honor song for this warrior. I was talking to this young lady here before, and I had mentioned to her, to me, she was just my daughter. She was my baby. To this day, I still hear that beautiful voice saying, "Hi, Dad." And I'll never hear that again. But it wasn't until her funeral, her wake, that all of these dignitaries and delegates from organizations like the Dakota 38 Riders, people came from Canada, Nebraska, Arizona, and they rode their horses. They led her casket, these warriors. The chief and keeper of the sacred bundle himself and his wife came down, and they took care of the ceremony themselves. Delegates from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Network were there to support her because she supported them. She prayed for them. She attended some of their services, held their mothers, held their fathers, cried with them. It wasn't until then that I seen my daughter in such a bigger, larger picture. She was more than just my daughter. She was brave enough and courageous enough to face these military people who were there to hurt and harm. I know that there was a young lady flying home from North Dakota who was a journalist, took pictures like this, who was sitting on the airplane going through her portfolio. And another lady approached her, walking down the aisle, looking over her shoulder. She asked her, she says, "What war is this from?" And this journalist looked up at her with surprise. And she said, "This is from North Dakota." But our people never were violent. We were peaceful protesters. Peaceful in the approach that we wanted to voice our concern, and the media will tell you that these Indians are crying around about water for their own reservation. They're crying around about their own water supply, but that's not true. Media manipulation will tell you that, but the truth is that we are fighting for water for all mankind. It is a humanitarian effort. One of the 3 prophecies that were obtained through the 3 young girls in Fatima, one of them was the water issue that we are facing today. And it is held in confidence, held by the Vatican. And we are going through that today. So I want to sing an honor song for my daughter, and then I'll close with a little piece that I wrote.
You've taken that off, right? You're not gonna, it's in your script, but don't make it too
Thank you. So I'm just going to end with a little bit of something real quick. Sorry about that. I've become a little emotional here. Over 6,919,377,000 of us live on this tiny planet, and only few of us can see the connections, patterns, mathematical in design and hidden in plain sight. We just have to know how to look within them to find the truth. As the world moves forward day by day, month by month, year to year. There are events unfolding according to a master plan, or the great work, as it is referred to by many occult practices such as Hermeticism, Freemason, Bulimic mysticism, and Catholicism. It can also be referred to as the magnum opus, which can literally be defined as the Creator's best work or masterpiece. It is quite surprising, however, that the majority of the public are still unaware of this fact. It is equally surprising that many people do not believe that there are secret societies and organizations that carry out their practices and beliefs behind closed doors, far away from public scrutiny, free to control the masses and impose their dominion over all mankind, such as racism, military control, and media manipulation. Our history tells us in written script that Adolf Hitler once praised the United States for its practices in placing fluoride in the water system to attack the pineal gland and slowly forcing the masses into submission and pacifism so that they can be controlled. This is in part due to the fact that many people are still unaware of the group's presence and influence over the world. Perhaps psychologically due to inflicts hopelessness, despair, fear, and racism within us. Instinctively, when a human being is presented with danger, we know to remove ourselves from it. We know to remove ourselves from it, inflicting harm or death upon ourselves. If a person is swimming in the ocean and distracted by all the blue sky, the palm trees, and the water, he is unaware of looming death of sharks swimming beneath him. But once a person is aware of the danger, they remove themselves from it and do not enter the water for fear of getting bit. However, it is quite saddening and unfortunate that many people would rather stay in the water and get bit by the shark when it comes to dealing with the corruption in our lives, our planet, or nearly all aspects of nature in our day and age. In order to defeat a problem, we must first understand its origin and birth and understand its danger it represents to us. It takes the initial knowledge of enlightening for us to be able to surpass or overcome any obstacles or dangers in our lives. We don't need hundreds and hundreds of men to save the world. Only one will do, or woman. If we take a quick look at the very definition of racism, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on their belief that one's race is superior over the other. We have to be careful about the English language as well. If we take that word race, what does it really mean? It is a competition to see who comes first. Yeah? And it could be applied to cars, boats, motorcycles, running. In this case, it refers to human beings. Who is the first to be financially set and control this earth? If you can control water, if you can control shelter, if you can control food, you control everybody. If we take a look at the very definition of ism, it is a political ideology in itself, a distinct practice, informal, derogatory. I guess what I'm saying is that, because I used to be a counselor for drug and alcohol dependency. The problem with a person, we begin to pick the leaves, the dead leaves off the tree, but the tree continues to be sick. We have to go to the root of the problem. Today, spiritually, culturally, I share with you that it is not us that are racist. This danger comes from the people who control this place. It is designed for us to keep busy amongst each other while they do their work. If you take a metaphor and look at the wrestling match, yeah? WWE, all of these wrestlers come into the middle of the ring and they are bitter enemies, while us, the audience, choose sides. I'm going for this guy. I'm going for that guy. And we even begin to fight amongst ourselves. But what happens after the match, yeah? These two people go back into the same locker room, shake hands. That was a good show. Here's your cut. Here's my cut. This is what is happening today. This is what the United States government is doing to us. This thing, racism, is not us. It is designed for us to keep ourselves busy, hating each other. So if we want to know the problem, if we want to identify the source, then let us open a dialogue for that. And we can overcome it. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you and have a very, very good conference. Thank you.
While I won't take a lot of time, this 3-minute orientation to your program organization will help you to quickly use this as a resource today. The table of contents on page 2 guides you to the day's schedule and information to help you navigate and choose your options throughout the day. At the end of the day, you may recycle your program at the registration table when you're done with it. On page 7, it gives you an overview at a glance of all the workshop sessions this afternoon. Full descriptions of content, presenters, and locations are on pages 22 through 25 for workshops that start at 12:30, and page 26 through 29 for workshops that begin at 2:15. Please be sure to have a second choice in mind should your first option be full. Please note there are a couple of cancellations today in the C time, one overcoming racism and adverse childhood experiences, and one in the D time, civility is in the eye of the beholder. At lunchtime, you may select your box lunch and beverage from a variety of choices available at noon in New Main, where you may have found coffee and refreshments this morning. You may eat your lunch there in the Great Hall or find another place to sit and eat. There are seats scattered all over campus, including in the skyway that leads to the library. Throughout the conference, Ricardo Levins Morales will have his work available for purchase outside of Founders Hall auditorium in the registration area.
Also for sale in the registration area are Overcoming Racism t-shirts. These t-shirts sales support this conference and the work of FREC. Thanks to the Science Museum of Minnesota, each of you have received 2 free tickets to the museum so that you can experience Race, Are We So Different? You are also invited to join a circle dialogue free of charge, and the program details, or the details, are in your program. As always, your feedback to this conference helps guide our planning for the coming year. Look for an early email next week with a survey link, and your participation is much appreciated. Please familiarize yourself with written logistics for this conference community. Feel free to ask for help from any of our FREC volunteers who are wearing volunteer t-shirts. Thank you to all of our great sponsors, our keynoters, our volunteers, committee members, for being a part of FREC's 2018 Overcoming Racism Conference. Now, as we transition into our keynoter this morning, just a few more words to share with you. Again, our thanks to Virgil and Shannon in helping us experience the rich rhythm of the drum and dance and preparing our hearts and minds and spirits to be fully present in this space that we share today. Whether you are here with us in the richness of our time together yesterday, or this is your first day at the conference, we are glad you are here with us this morning. You are in the right place. Now, I would like to help set the table for us this morning with a brief recap of some of yesterday's presentations. Our conference theme is Overcoming Racism in Spite of. It makes the assumption that each of us can name the in spite ofs that can become barriers, impediments, sources of discouragement in our anti-racism work. The title also presumes a deep resolve to be undeterred in our commitment and our work to transform this state in which we live. Our first keynote presenter, Isabel Chancellor, began by identifying one of the main in spite ofs as the cult of ignorance, identified by Isaac Asimov as an anti-intellectualism, which believes my ignorance is as good as your knowledge. Isabel reminded us of the necessity for each of us to bring deep integrity to anti-racism work by doing our own work, which includes continued learning, but also integrative reflection and a sharp awareness that good intentions are never enough. Without a daily commitment to doing our own work, we fall victim to the false and often hidden assumption that white culture is the right culture. Isabel boldly and bravely shared her own personal story, reminding us that learning, education, and wisdom can never be equated with degrees. She reminded us that good leadership is required of us all, and not just a designated leader. By so honestly and forthrightly sharing the struggles she faced, and especially the significant role of her father and mother played in filling a brown-skinned girl with confidence in who she is, Isabel helped set the table for an engaging conversation with a diverse group of panelists led by KP Hong. KP began by observing that the work we seek to do happens at the intersection between emotion and thought. Each of our panelists went on to share their own personal stories in dealing with the complexities of racism in this country. Catalina observed she often felt like she was in an abusive relationship with this country. A common theme among the panelists was the challenge we face every day when we encounter the dominant cultural lie that we are not connected. something that I believe Virgil was just sharing with us and talking about. Justin observed that the ignorance list is long, but we do not need to fix all ignorant attitudes and react to every ignorant thing that is said. We do need to focus on what matters for real change, which includes striving to be in relationship. Hopefully all those present attended workshops which stimulated and challenged you. There will be more of those today. The evening concluded with a wonderful celebration of this 10th anniversary year for our Overcoming Racism Conference. We need moments to celebrate, now more than ever. Thank you for being here today.
And now I'd like to introduce our Saturday keynote performer, Carlisle Brown, who is a playwright, artist, thinker, whose body of work through the years continues to bring fresh and riveting insights into the experience of race in America. Taken from Wikipedia, Carlisle is an American playwright, performer, and artistic director, and founder of Minneapolis-based Carlisle Brown and Company. Notable plays include The African Company Presents Richard III, Pure Confidence, and The Beggar's Strike. Today you will experience Acting Black, Demystifying Racism. Using the power of art to investigate difficult concepts, Acting Black takes us to the roots of American racism and its consequences for all of us. It explores the evolution of the Black stereotype, tracing the birth of its beginning from a single individual on a specific night in Louisville, Kentucky in 1828, to the racial conflicts we still endure to this day. Carlisle Brown.
Can you hear me now? Yeah? All right. You all set, Mike? Hi. Well, we'll just begin. One evening, an actor asked me to write a play for an all-black cast. But what exactly is a black? First of all, what's his color? So wrote the iconoclastic French playwright and essayist Jean Genet. Out of this musing, Genet wrote the play Les Nègres, The Blacks, a clown show, for which he declared, this play written, I repeat, by a white man is intended for a white audience. But if, which is unlikely, it is ever attended by a black audience, then a white person must be invited to attend every evening. The organizer of the show should welcome him formally, dress him in ceremonial costume, and lead him to his seat, preferably in the front row of the orchestra. The actors will play for him. A spotlight should be focused on the symbolic white throughout the evening. But what if no white person accepted? Then let white mass be distributed to the black spectators as they enter the theater. And if the blacks refuse the mass, then let a dummy be used. In the play The Blacks, half the cast of all black actors wear masks and play members of the court who are white, with the rest of the cast playing the parts of the blacks. It'd be safe to say that some of them are acting white while others are acting black. Within the play, there's a performance by the blacks, a reenactment of a crime in which the blacks are perpetrators, and the court is spectator, victim, judge, and avenger. The court and the blacks see in each other what they expect to see, playing to each other's expectations in a ritual that goes on every night without change. It's a play about racism, colonialism, and power, and it's intended for a white audience. The blacks first opened in the United States on May 11th, 1961 at the St. Mark's Playhouse in New York. In its cast, although unknown at the time, were some of the most accomplished black actors of our age. Roscoe Lee Brown, James Earl Jones, Cynthia Belgrave, Lou Gossett, Cecily Tyson, Godfrey Cambridge, Raymond St. Jacques, Maya Angelou, and Charles Gardone, who would go on to write that marvelous Pulitzer Prize-winning play, No Place to Be Somebody. 2 years earlier, Lorraine Hansberry, A Raisin in the Sun, opened on, that's the wrong slide, bro. Yeah. Yeah. Now, the next. Oh, there you go. We're good. Don't get nervous, it's cool. We're all right. Yeah, Falky, no, I know it's not you. 2 years earlier, Lorraine Hansberry, A Raisin in the Sun, opened on Broadway at the Ethel Barrymore Theater on March 11th, 1959. Directed by Lloyd Richards, starring Sidney Poitier, Ruby Dee, Diana Sands, Glenn Turman, and Claudia McNeil. I remember it. I was there. I saw it on a school trip. It was my first play, and it had a profound effect on me. I remember when Diana Sands as Beneatha and Claudia McNeil as Mama were having a disagreement about faith. Beneatha says to Mama, "There simply is no blasted God." And Mama, who is the soul of patience, love, and restraint, slaps Beneatha across the face, and a low and steady voice that seemed to reach deep into your chest tells Beneatha, "Now you say after me, in my mother's house, there is still God." Well, she said it scared the shit out of me. And I remember me and my classmates repeating right along with Beneatha, "In my mother's house, there's still God." It was in that moment that I first realized the power of theater, the power of the imagination, and came to appreciate and identify with the positivity of my own blackness. A Raisin in the Sun is a play of such perfection that would make Ibsen and Chekhov blush. Yet it is generally regarded rather paternalistically as a black play. While white audiences loved it, black audiences tended to regard white audience response to the play to be rather condescending. To me, it was a transcendent piece of art that brought truth, meaning, and realization to my life. Where to many white audience members, it was a brilliant exposition of the other, where the white audience is spectator, victim, judge, and avenger. Exactly the situation that Janae is illuminating in The Blacks. So the question is, which of these plays is a black play? Are we watching black actors acting, or are we watching black actors acting black? The first actors to act black in this country were, of course, the early white American minstrel performers who put bootblack on their faces to portray lazy, shiftless, comical Negroes for the entertainment of the general white American populace. But these minstrel performers had a deeper purpose, and that was to assure this general white American populace that they had nothing to fear from the blacks. The blacks would not take their jobs or their women or insinuate themselves in their civic and social affairs, that they would not compete with or displace or even desire to compete with or displace the hard-fought-for values and material wealth of American life because they were naked and imitative and childlike, without ambition or desires, except to please and entertain the white race that's given the blacks morals and religion and a place and purpose that will make this country the greatest nation the world has ever known. Dr. Freud, would you please take a seat? This is the goal of the early American minstrels, and they achieved their aim by acting black, acting the blacks of their imaginations. And we can trace this phenomenon to a single individual on a specific night. His name was Thomas Dartmoor Daddy Jim Rice. And the place was Ludlow and Smith's Southern Theater in Louisville, Kentucky in the year 1828. I was invited to be part of a panel on Daddy Jim Rice, a kind of roast to his dishonor. And my first realization was that I didn't actually know anything about Daddy Jim Rice. I mean, I know who he was and what he did, but I didn't really know anything about the man. Where he was born, who his parents were, his heritage. And the more I thought about it, I realized I didn't care who he really was. And if I had my power to bring him back for roasting, the only way I'd roast him would be on a spit over open fire. Yeah, he'd be blacking up all right. Blacking Daddy Jim Rice. Light him up like he was a rack of St. Louis ribs. Light him up like, and slather him up with some Jim Crow barbecue sauce. See how he likes it. You see, I love me some African American history. The history of African Americans in this country is by far among the greatest American stories, bar none. If a great story is the redemptive, uplifting, triumphant story of the lowest of the low reaching the heights of dignity and human worth, then black folks got the story thing going on. But every time I sit down to write, I have to deal with the legacy that redneck peckerwoods like Daddy Jim Rice, yeah, that's what he is, like Daddy Jim Rice and his imitators have left us. Why, if black folks could resurrect him and take him to The Hague, he would be tried for crimes against humanity, a story killer, a murderer of human legacy in the first degree. He is the guy who is responsible for that thing that happens when you show up and the white folks didn't know you're gonna be black. Oh my goodness, he's black. He's angry. Before you know it, he's gonna start getting loud, waving his finger, getting in our face, then he's gonna put his hands on his hips, might even put out a gun or a razor. And I'm saying, what are you looking at? Don't make me get loud. Don't make me get in your face. Don't make me hurt you. You see, that's just the way we people are. Once we get invested in our expectations, we'll do everything in our power to see that they get realized. And in the case of the legacy of Daddy Jim Rice, we have taken that human failing to the outer reaches of a social phenomena. I don't think it's the black in blackface makeup that makes it so startling and dehumanizing. After all, it's only color. But the lips, them big white liver-licking lips, with that bright white perpetual smile that smacks with a sense of humanness, a hint of pathos, a touch of truth, a smile so contented and complete that the power of its impression seeps through every corner and crevice of American society. And if you're black, you're wearing that face whether you like it or not. So I said, let's build us a fire and roast him. Light him up. Where's the kerosene? Somebody give me a match. When I try to think of Daddy Rice as much as I can, I imagine him from the point of view of a dramatist. And what I mean by that is I can only think of him as a character, a person with motive, somebody actively engaged in getting what he wants. So what did Daddy Rice want, and what was he doing to get it? Well, he's an actor, and what he wants most of the time when he hadn't got one is a job. He wants to stop ducking his landlord and a better sustenance in his life than a diet of codfish and ale. He wants to be a hit. He wants to be famous and live the life he's always dreamed. It's probably all he ever thinks about. And consequently, it makes him alert to any and all possible opportunities. So there he is in Louisville with just another gig, just another grind leading to nowhere. And from the back of the theater, he sees what is described by a contemporary eyewitness account as an old, decrepit Negro singing a song and doing a jig in the stable yard. And Daddy Rice says to himself, whoa, that boy is funny. Now, as history tells us, this old, decrepit Negro, and I'm sure you can all call up in your mind the image of an old, decrepit Negro you know. Hell, you're looking at an old, decrepit Negro now. But this old, decrepit Negro, bad enough he was old and decrepit, he was a cripple. Said he would deform with a right shoulder drawn up high into a hump, and left leg stiff and darn near useless and crooked at the knee, so as to make him walk with a painful, perpetually lumbering limp. And despite his condition, old, decrepit, crippled, in bondage, and black, he's singing a song and doing a jig in a stable yard all by himself. As far as he knew, wasn't nobody out there in that yard but him. And the song he's singing goes like so. Wheel about, turn about, do just so, and every time a wheel about, a jump Jim Crow. Now, if we know little about Daddy Jim Rice, we know absolutely nothing about this old decrepit Negro. Nor do we have any idea what about the presence of this old decrepit Negro in that historical moment seemed so funny to Daddy Jim Rice. Seemed this old brother was happy about something, happy at a time when there wasn't much for black folks to be happy about. But I will bet you $1 to a donut that that old brother had just put something on his old master, Mr. Crow. He had just pulled off that old Br'er Rabbit and the Briar Patch trick, and it was tickling him to death. He was just laughing and singing and dancing about how he made a fool of that old white man he didn't even know. But while he was singing and dancing, he still had his presence of mind. Because if he went to church at all, he went to that old-timey church where if the Spirit moves you and you get up and dance, you better not cross your feet. And if any of y'all got your feet crossed in here, uncross them. Otherwise, you're liable to have the devil up in here. No, 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 don't cross your feet. If you want to turn around, you got to either wheel about or jump. Wheel about, turn about, do just so, and every time a wheel about, a jump Jim Crow. Now, I am sure Daddy Rice wasn't aware of any of this. It wasn't in his consciousness, wasn't in his capacity to see. He just said, whoa, that boy is funny. Now, Daddy Rice, he was a dancer, a professional imitator, an Ethiopian delineator. He could pick up a step. So without regard for substance, Daddy Rice appropriates what he sees. And what is that? What is that dance that old decrepit Negro was doing? And not just the dance itself, but how was that old decrepit Negro doing the dance? There's a description of the dance, Jump Jim Crow and Marshall and Stern's jazz dance, the story of American vernacular dance. It says you throw your weight on the heel of one foot and toe the other. And then you put your left hand on your hip and your right arm extended in the air, and oh, there must be a much of twitching of the arm and shoulder. And then you got to be old and decrepit with a right shoulder drawn up high into a hump, and left leg stiff and crooked at the knee. Smile on your face and light up the world. Wheel about, turn about, do just so, and every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. Well, Daddy Rice goes into the theater and the stage manager says, what you gonna do tonight, TD? He said, I'm gonna do that old decrepit Negro. And he goes up on stage, and that's what he does, that old decrepit Negro. And he's a hit. The audience, the Louisville audience, calls him out 20 times for 20 encores to do it again and again and again. Daddy Rice spent nearly the rest of his life doing that old decrepit Negro. He had spawned an industry, an art form. He became rich and famous, playing that old decrepit Negro night after night, year after year. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, London, Dublin, everywhere. Ironically, when he died poor. An old, decrepit white entertainer who had lost his fame and fortune, his life passing back to the day when he saw an old Negro dancing in a stable yard. It's rather a sad story, really. Sad and somehow commonplace. But the real story, the one I think is far more fascinating, is the story of that old Negro dancing in that stable yard, spinning and wheeling and turning about with a smile on his face that light up the world. Wheel about, turn about, do just so, and every time we wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. Now, the birth of American minstrelsy coincides with the birth of the American Railroad. In 1827, the year before Daddy Rice was thought to have made his blackface debut, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad were incorporated. As the railways grew, it physically unified the country, with its minstrel passengers aboard spreading the new narrative of the blacks across a new and growing nation, providing white European immigrants with a common language and social point of view. After all, the blacks were at the center of the great national debate. What will become of the new Western territories? Would they be admitted as slave states or free? And what will we do with the blacks? And who exactly are the blacks? Turning stereotype into archetype, the minstrel performers provided answers using a simple format that survives to this day in our sitcoms and variety shows. The black caricatures they portrayed possessed particularly uniform characteristics. For one, they made terrible usage of the English language, which must have been very amusing to the new European immigrants who had but a slim grip on the mother tongue themselves. They had great ambition for little insignificant things and were most often failures in achieving them. They were lazy, shiftless, distrustful, with the lowest moral standards imaginable. Their greatest desire was to be white, an unobtainable objective in the physical sense, but attempted nevertheless through behavior. And as imitation is the greatest form of flattery, it was this particular assumed behavioral characteristics of the blacks that was at the center of the minstrel's performance practice. They were acting black by portraying blacks who were attempting to act white. This bears repeating. They were acting black by portraying blacks who were attempting to act white. No sooner than Daddy Rice's minstrel performer took the stage that minstrel became America's most popular art form, spreading like wildfire across a vast and new nation, and setting the stage for another minstrel show at the Supreme Court in 1858. Dred Scott, Brother Dred, was a slave born in Virginia who was taken by his master, U.S. Army Major John Emerson, from St. Louis, where Scott was purchased, to Fort Snelling in a new territory, which is now present-day Minnesota. On the basis of being in a free territory, Scott sued for his freedom, and the case eventually went before the Supreme Court. In its decision, the court ruled that the blacks and their descendants, whether slave or free, were not protected by the Constitution and could never be citizens of the United States. That, in fact, no black had any right that a white was bound to respect. Now, no longer a passing entertainment of a minstrel show, white supremacy becomes the law of the land. The effects of the Supreme Court's decision appeared everywhere in American life, in children's books, sheet music, advertisements. I love this one. Dwell on this for a minute, will you? Yeah. Cartoons, bric-a-brac, lawn jockeys. The black cook on the cream of wheat, Aunt Jemima on the pancake box, Uncle Ben on the rice. After the Civil War, black actors started acting black in the minstrel shows. Somebody said, oh, hey, I know what we'll do. We'll get some real Negroes in our minstrel show. Yeah, we'll put some real Negroes up in here. That'll be a novelty, wouldn't it? That'll be authentic, all right. But the problem is that not all black people are black. Some are brown, sepia tone, coffee color, cinnamon tint, some like cocoa and chocolate. Many can even pass for white. We're not all black. But this seemed to be a problem for white audiences because they wanted their minstrels to be black. Indigo black, blue black, coal black, boot black, polished black. As far away from whiteness as blackness could get, even if they were already black. So the black minstrels, they had to put on blackface just like the white minstrels were doing. But whoa, hold it now, wait a minute. If all the blacks are wearing black, how's the audience gonna know they're actually black? So the interlocutor, the master of ceremonies of the blackface minstrel shows, he alone would perform without blackface so that the white audiences would know that what they were experiencing was the real McCoy. The black minstrels faced this madness with talent, imagination, and psychological acuity. I mean, what choice did they have? It was probably the safest job a black man could have in the dangerous world of Reconstruction America. Never mind a bad review. A badly received performance could get you tarred and feathered or run out of town on a rail or worse. And as performers, they had to be able to sing, dance, do monologues, play at least 2 musical instruments, possess an impeccable sense of comedic timing, and be able to take an objectification of themselves and turn it into an evening's entertainment in order to get reasonable, steady work. They knew what they were doing. They knew intuitively that although they were the central characters in the narrative of the blacks, that the narrative was neither for or about them, but for and about the whites. That the purpose of the blacks in the white authored narrative was to display to the whites what they feared for themselves, of being powerless victims without the hope or capacity to change their condition. This must have been a very familiar theme to the new white European immigrants, because after all, they came from a Europe where they were peasants, second sons without any hope of land inheritance, with oppressive kings, onerous taxes, religious intolerance, and whose ancestors has been slaughtering each other in Europe for centuries. What the hell's the next thing I'm supposed to say in here? Now they were in a place where they had freedom and opportunity. I need my boy Mike, I need him up here. I'll lose it. So after a hard day's work, they might take, I'm good now. You want to come up there? All right. So after a hard day's work, they might take in a minstrel show. Laughing and jeering at the misfortunes of the blacks, they may not have known who they were, but what they did know is they weren't Indians and they weren't niggers. Perhaps the most significant outcome of this white authored narrative was its use as a mechanism of social control. Once the narrative took hold, then all the blacks had to conform to it. And not just the black-faced minstrels, but the entire black population is forced into acting black. And in this way, myth becomes reality. And to behave otherwise is to be a danger and a threat to white society. And the consequences for deviating from the prescribed behavior were dire. Burnings, brutalization, couple of white boys on a rite of passage thing. Lynching. And to be confronted by that iconic social enforcer, the Klansman, the guy in the original hoodie, who, like the court in Genèse the Blacks, is spectator, victim, judge, and avenger. You know, I never understood what was up with the disguise. Surely they knew that black people knew that there were white people under them sheets. And I never understood what those poor Southern white boys were doing fighting for the Confederacy in the Civil War. I mean, it must have been an identity thing. It wasn't like preserving slavery was going to get them a job. I mean, if you are poor and white in the South, you really are invisible. But yet they go around putting on bed sheets, burning crosses, marching in circles, talking about whoa-ee-oh, whoa, whoa-ee-oh, whoa. I mean, wow, it's a ritual and a performance intended to regulate the behavior of the blacks. And under these circumstances, as W.E.B. Du Bois says, black is not a color, but a condition. Of the cast of characters that make up the early black American behavioral stereotypes, there are around 8 to 10 basic categories. And as we catalog them, we must keep in mind that they are all manifestations of a white imagination. There is Jim Crow, who we've seen before, proving yet again that those black folks can show enough sing and dance. And then there's Aunt Jemima. Oh, well, maybe not. And then there's Hattie McDaniel and Gone with the Wind. With her earthly wisdom and fierce independence, she don't take no back talk. Hattie got her a 1940 Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in Gone with the Wind. White folks gave Hattie an award for acting black. And then there's Uncle Tom. We all know Uncle Tom, along with his brother, Uncle Ben, on the box of rice. And then there's Buck, big black Buck, large and menacing and always lurking after white women. When he smiles, all you see is his teeth and the whites of his eyes. No pupils, just whites. He's the perfect picture of a monster. Jezebel, she's just a hoe. Without the sense she was born with. Always grinning and giggling and talking nonsense. Like Butterfly McQueen is prissy and Gone with the Wind. I don't know nothing about birthing no baby. This fool doesn't even know that her very womb is the source for the labor that produces the South agricultural wealth. And when she has her some babies, they will not be children, but pickaninnies. With big bulging eyes, unkempt hair, ruby red lips, and gaping wide mouths into which they stuff huge slices of watermelon. Pickaninny like little black Sambo, little nappy-headed black boy who surrenders his colorful new clothes to 4 hungry tigers, who in their vanity fight over the clothes, chasing each other around the tree so fast that they turn into butter, with Sambo's mammy, Black Mambo, uses to make Sambo some pancakes. And after a steady diet of pancakes and watermelon, little black pickaninny Sambo is one day going to grow up to be the most outrageous stereotype of them all, Zip Coon. Oh, Zip Coon, he's a mean old scholar. Oh, Zip Coon, he's a mean old scholar. Oh, Zip Coon, he's a mean old scholar. Pass him up a gum tree, Cooney on the stump. Pass him up a gum tree, Cooney on the stump. Pass him up a gum tree, Cooney on the stump. Pass him up a gum tree, Cooney on the stump. Oh, but never trouble, Zip Coon will jump. Narcissistic, unrealistic, nihilistic Zip Coon. Arrogant, braggadocious, ostentatious, dressed to the double nines, and speaking in tongues, puns, and a ceaseless succession of endless consonants, he is the ultimate destroyer of the English language. The question is, from where in the subterraneous subconscious of the white American imagination do these psychic emanations come from? Psychology calls this kind of pathology transference, where a person's fears, feelings, desires, wants shifts from oneself to another, or in this case, to the other. We could see this transference throughout the history and course of American popular culture, and it operates in two major ways, as far as race is concerned. There is the appropriation of color, as with Al Jolson singing Mammy in the first talkie film, The Jazz Singer, in 1929. And I'm not singing no damn Mammy, okay? Then we have the appropriation of identity itself. On the one hand, we have Jim Beckwourth, African-American mountain man, fur trader, explorer, Crow Indian chief, who was responsible for the discovery of Beckwourth Pass through the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which would be the principal route on the Oregon Trail. In the 1959 movie Tomahawk, he is betrayed by the white actor Jackie Oakey without the benefit of whiteface. Jackie Oakey, never mind. I'm not going to go there. Okay. And there are other ethnicities that provide sources for this strange need for transference. There is Kung Fu with David Carradine as a Buddhist monk. Chuck Connors is Geronimo. Breakfast at Tiffany's, Mickey Rooney is Japanese. And Johnny Depp is Tonto. It seems like white folks can't enjoy a story unless they're in it. Why is this? You know, it used to be that only black girls had big butts. Now white girls got big butts too. Brothers walk around with the pants with the ass sticking out. Now white boys got their ass sticking out. Chuck Berry got his thing going on. White folks bring in Elvis Presley. That old devil at the Crossroads blues guitar playing Robert Johnson's 100 years dead and gone, and white folks are remembering Eric Clapton. Why is this? It's as if we're being followed. You know, under constant surveillance for every move, every gesture, every turn of phrase that could be tastefully and inoffensively be appropriated and put to good use, like making lots and lots of money. White folks can make a lot of money acting black. Black folks, not so much. What is that? And when it comes for the narratives of black folks, there's only three. There's the victim. Crying, suffering, bleeding, mangled, cut up, and breathing in a heavy, you're not going to make it kind of way. His fate was unjust, but he bore it nobly. His selfless and ultimate sacrifice was not for himself, was not, don't do that, not for himself, but for another. Guess who that is? And in his darkest hour, he cries out to the Lord, "Oh, Lord, help me, please save me." Then he dies, fade out, end of story. Number two is that white knight or nitress coming to save you on a buxom white steed, waving a big-ass broadsword and crying out for truth, justice, and the American way. In other words, the help. I asked a friend of mine one time what he thought of that movie, Shawshank Redemption, about a white convict in the penitentiary. I guess they thought they'd take the minority view on that one. Anyway, my friend said, it was like driving Miss Daisy to prison. Driving Miss Daisy to prison. Can you imagine Miss Daisy behind bars? She'd be talking about, "Hope, on the gate, Hope." But Hope wouldn't let that happen to Miss Daisy. You see, because she helped him. Yes, Miss Daisy helped you when you needed help the most. When you was feeling low and not knowing what to do, Miss Daisy helped you. And after she helped you, everything was perfect and happy, just like it was before. It feels so good. It feels so warm. I believe these are tears welling up in my eyes. Forget about the past. Forget what we did to you and took from you and smile. All you need to do is count Miss Daisy for your blessings, learn to be grateful, and everything will be fine. Some of y'all in here like that, aren't you? Come on, so how many in here like Miss Daisy? Come on, raise your hands. Yeah, come on, Miss Daisy. She's a nice old lady. She don't mean no harm. She's not a racist. And how many of y'all want to drive Miss Daisy? Yeah, I think so. The story with the help is the one that we most often see. If you've never ever seen a black person in your life, the one thing you will know about black folks is from the characters and the story with the help. Although the theme and plot design surround the black characters, the story is really about the help and how the help helps. In it, the black characters are voiceless, without agency, and without sufficient consciousness to shape for themselves some arc of change. It may not be structured like a minstrel show, but it sure enough works like one. And this shit is supposed to inspire racial dialogue? A white lady says to this sister, "Did you see Driving Miss Daisy? I just loved it, didn't you?" And the sister pauses, and she says quietly to herself, "Driving Miss Daisy? Are you freaking kidding me?" But instead she says, "Oh, yes, I did. It was very nice." Black people will lie to white people, Jack. You have to, because white people are dangerous people. You have to be careful what you say to white people. You don't know what white people will do. You are going to have read your script and know your lines. Was it something I said? I didn't do anything. I didn't mean anything by it. No, no, this is not a gun. I got my hands up. Don't shoot. The third narrative of black folks you most often see is the buddy story. You know, like, take the Long Ranger and Tonto. No, I know. Tonto's not black. He's an Indian, but this is America. We don't care what kind of nigga you are. So the Long Ranger is always saying stuff to Tonto like, "Don't worry, Tonto. I'll find us a way out of this." And, "Oh, Tonto, did I have to save your life today again?" "No, Tonto, I know you're an Indian, but it's this way. Follow me, Tonto." This is an old joke about Tonto and the Long Ranger. They're surrounded on all sides by wild, hostile Indians. These Indians are nothing like Tonto. No, they are wild, hostile Indians. And the only thing they live for is to put a long and permanent whipping on the Long Ranger's butt. There's no way out. There's no escape. The wild, hostile Indians are mounting their attack. When all seems lost, the Long Ranger turns to Tonto, and for the first time ever, he asks Tonto for his opinion. "What do we do now, Tonto?" Tonto said, "What do you mean we, white man?" Payback is a bitch. And if you're a black character in a horror film or a sci-fi flick, forget about it. You'll never see the credits. You'll be dead before the end of the first act. You see, it'd be the same old thing. It isn't just a sickness. It's a ridiculous sickness. It's exactly what Janae is talking about in The Blacks. It's an endless performance going round and round, night after night, day in, day out, 24/7, in an endless loop that goes swirling around like the water going down your toilet bowl. Why is this? Is it envy? Is it guilt? Are you afraid of something? Is there something that you want? Why is this? We know it exists. We feel bad about it. We feel guilty. We want to fix it. We want it to stop. But my question is, why does this shit exist in the first damn place? Thank you. Amen. love that. Thank you for your enthusiasm, sister. I gave a lecture once at the Columbus Museum of Art. They had an exhibition of paintings and sculptures by Frederick Remington and Charles Marion Russell depicting the early American West. They were holding the lectures to get ahead of the curve before the naysayers showed up. Rashid and his dashiki, Fanny Feminist in her big glasses, and Chief Big Crow in his blanket. Talking about, we want them diversity now. We want to hear all of our stories now. If we're going to represent, then represent. We want our representation now. No, the museum didn't want to hear none of that. So they hired me, Rashid and my dashiki, Fanny Feminist in her big glasses, and Chief Big Crow in their blanket to explain to audiences why the exhibition had no representation of African American or women, and why all the Indians looked alike. So I show up at the museum the afternoon of the lecture to do a sound check in the lecture hall, and then I go out into the hallway and I'm watching folks going in from the lecture, when suddenly I see 10 young brothers rolling down the hallway. And I mean, they are rocking it, kicking it, striding along with every now and then a little sidestep to give the motion a little bling. Gangland brothers from the hood. And they're walking down the hallway of the Columbus Museum of Art. Where the hell did they think they were going? What were they doing there when the very facade itself is a message that says to them, do not enter? So one of the brothers, he bops up to me and he says, we're looking for Brother Carlisle Brown. We're here to see him represent. I showed him to the lecture hall and said, he'll be in there in just a minute. I would learn later that these brothers had just taken part in a theatrical boot camp in the neighborhood run by this brother Antar Keith Mason, where they learned through some tough love how to make theater about their lives. They had to learn how to be on time, be nice to your mama, tell your story, learn your lines, tell your story, tell the truth, and support black artists that come into your community. So I guess on the real side, these brothers were following orders. So we got a room full of white upper middle class retirees and the roll-on-in brothers. Right? So I'm doing my lecture and I come to those two images that I showed you before. Jim Beckworth and his imitator, Jackie Oakey. And I suggest to them that this is the problem of telling the real story of the American West. Well, suddenly, they all gave out a collective gasp. It was as if they were all saying, oh my God, somebody's been lying to us. And, the retirees and the roll-on-in brothers, they all seem to take it personally, each in their own way, of course. Nobody likes being lied to. And then one of the retirees raises his hand. Now, there was something about that retiree that made me see it would be wise for me to ignore him. But he's the only one raising his hand. And he's raising it in such a way with his arms outstretched as far as he could stretch it, and his hand fluttering in a wind of urgency like a white flag waving surrender. He had our complete and undivided attention. I could see him now. I was looking right at him just like I'm looking at you. I could see him nervous. Maybe he's not used to getting up in front of a group of people and expressing his feelings. Maybe he's never done this before. And as much as I wanted to save him from himself, I had to acknowledge him. Yes, sir. And then he stands up. Now, we all know that when the average person gets up to speak when called upon in a public forum, we are likely to witness any number of things. From a glorious oration of inspiring ideals to a complete and utterly rambling disaster. This is like Napoleon saying, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll attack Waterloo. That's a good idea. Or George Custer saying, charge! Or George Bush saying just about anything. These are not good ideas. And letting that retiree speak was not a good idea. But in spite of himself, in spite of myself, he asked this question. Where do you get your facts from? Oh, no. It's a perfectly reasonable, rational question. And indeed, it was a question that was simply looking for an answer. But by the time it came out of his mouth, it sounded like, well, where did you get your facts from? Well, what did he say that for? Those folks in that lecture hall were on him like white on rice. And not just the black people, of what they were few other than the roll-on-in brothers, but white people too. The neoliberals were trying to out-liberal the liberals, and one lefty guy wanted to occupy the museum, you know? And they're talking about, we must have meaningful dialogue together. We must abandon our notions of privilege and social entitlement. We must seek inclusion, pluralism, diversity, multiculturalism. Let the immigrants flow, yo! Get your butch, dyke, lesbian, transgender, cross-dressing, homo ass over here, because we're including everybody! And the other group, they're a little defensive, they're like, are you calling me a racist? How dare you call me a racist? I'm not a racist. As if you could swim in the ocean and not get wet. There was this large, black, mammy-looking woman sitting next to the old retiree, and she was letting him have it with both barrels at close range. Oh! You saying he's not intelligent? Not smart? Not correct with his information? You think no black person is as smart as you? Well, let me tell you something. We smart as you, and maybe even smarter, because we got to deal with you and our own selves too. And that ain't no Einstein joke. Well, the poor retiree, he had to defend himself. So he says, look, all I want to know is if I'm walking along the sidewalk and I see these gentlemen coming toward me, meaning the roll-on-in brothers, should I cross the street? Look, it was a reasonably rational question. An honest question, a practical question, a question that was earnestly and honestly looking for an answer. Like maybe the subtext is, will I be welcomed? Will I be engaged? Perhaps we'll find something in common between us. Well, the roll-on-in brothers, they were having none of it. They called that poor retiree everything but the child of God. It was a repository and the exemplification of the blankety blank, explicative and low down talking about your mama adjective of a racist. You don't know me. You don't want to know me. We dress like this because we're saying, the white man, the white man, the white man. We're not going to be who you want us to be. We're going to be who we want to be. We're not asking you for your inclusion. We're including our own damn selves. If you want to cross the street, go ahead. Who cares? Well, the old retiree, he was mortified. He was sweating and he fidgeted about in his chair like he was looking around for something to say. I suppose I should have stopped it all and saved that poor retiree from the fix he was in, but I couldn't do it. I was far too fascinated by the fact that although it was loud and antagonistic and painful to witness, the retiree and the roll-on-in brothers were actually having a conversation in the Columbus Museum of Art. Ought to be an act for that. Finally, the retiree picks out the one guy among the roll-on-in brothers, who isn't yelling and pointing fingers at him. He seems quiet, he seems reasonable. So the retiree, besieged as he was, he somehow masters himself and he stands up again. He turns and he faces the back of the room where the roll-on-in brothers are sitting all in a row, looking all intimidating and shit. And he points to the quiet one and he says, "What do you think?" And this brother says, "Oh, who, me? No, I'm not with these guys. I'm a graduate student at engineering at Ohio State University. I dress like this because this is what I like." Well, one of the roll-on-in brothers taps another and he says, "I told you that dude was no brother. He's only acting black." So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. I want you to think about it, take it home with you. And we want to know what it is that you can do to stop this festering sore. Well, first of all, as you can see, this performance, like Janae's acting black, is intended for a white audience. And it's intended for you to look within yourselves and talk among yourselves about what you can do to stop this festering sore that is racism in America. And if you would like to have that discussion now, I'd be happy to facilitate that conversation. And to get us started, I'd like us to try this on for an idea. I'm suggesting to you that racism is a white problem. People of color are affected by it, for certain. But we are merely mirrors to you. Ebony reflections of some mysterious thing within yourselves. We cannot help you. You have to talk to each other. And this is what I propose to happen now. So, is there any retiree among you two? Yes? Oh, you're a person of color. I'm going to discriminate against y'all for a bit. We'll explain why later. Or you'll see, I think. Now, come on. Like, I don't see. I do this show, and I'm always hesitant to talk and stuff like that. But otherwise, usually in life, they just like quite willing to interrupt me, speak over me. So let's. There you go. Yes. Where? Oh, yes, sir. Oh, he's an insider. Okay.
I've got. Since nobody's speaking, I'm a retiree, so. Maybe that helps. So, stand up. So I served Cherokee Park United Church for 35 years, and it's on St. Paul's West Side. And one of the things we did early on is kind of dive into our own history, hoping to take some pride in that, and kind of digging
Sorry, I didn't mean to
around.
interrupt you, but could you,
Dig.
I know I'm
Face this way?
here, but yeah, just
Yeah.
talk to them.
Digging around in some old files, we came across a bunch of old pictures, and one of them was a minstrel show, people in blackface from, I'm not sure, late 40s, early 50s, somewhere in there. You know, I've seen the picture, you just kind of wanted to hide it back in the file, which actually we did for a while. And then I would say, so I started there in the 80s, and then probably 20 years, maybe the early 2000s, something or other, one of the people who was actually in that minstrel show came to the church, and he hadn't been for many years and moved and stuff, but he came back to visit, and I sat down at coffee hour, and I didn't know he was in the minstrel show, but he brought the minstrel show up that he'd been in and spoke of it with great pride. So I share that story because it's not just, I think, a story about a small church on St. Paul's West Side. That's the Minnesota story. I'm guessing there's a lot of churches that had minstrel shows. I'm guessing there are a lot of schools that had minstrel shows. But it's also true, while that history continues to be a part of who we are and can't escape it, this is also the church where this conference began. So we don't need to be stuck there, but it's with us.
Thank you. Well said.
Okay, my question is kind of on the flip side. I'm married to a black man from the south side of Chicago. So, thanks, William. Okay, so my question is about if you are an educated black person and if you speak like an educated person, then why is it like they're told they're acting white and it's a negative connotation?
I just want to make the relationship clear. Where I'm here, I'm asking the questions. Yeah, right. And you're providing the answers. All right. So maybe someone could sort of respond to that. I don't quite understand what it is, but maybe someone else. I mean that in a real way. These are real questions, and I actually really want you to talk to each other. Right? As we don't want to do your work for you, people of color. Right?
I'm not a retiree, but would like to be. I think the discussion about racism in the white community will get serious when we start talking about reparations. So I'm talking to white people here, I guess, that I think a lot of racism is tied in with the wealth that we have, the wealth that we inherited, and we won't get serious in this until we recognize that and deal with the historical proportions on it.
Thank you.
So what I would say, one thing about that response is it allows one to escape into the good white person. And so getting up and saying, I think reparations are the thing to do. It may be, but I think the first step that we all need to take is our own participation. And I don't, I'm sorry, I just, that's what I would say to another white person. It can be a way to duck what's going on. And I don't have any answers. But.
That's right. We're just having a conversation at the moment.
So my name is Bill. I appreciate the question very much. I also appreciate that I've had a lot of good mentors in my life. And I knew there was something really, really wrong for a long time. My first mentors were bigots and racists. And I really felt there was something wrong because there was a lot of dissonance in what I was being taught. And then I went into the workplace, and I was really grateful that I was white because I had opportunities. And I made things difficult for a lot of my employers and workmates, and I ended up not being in the workplace. And that was I do this work, the work of awareness raising in myself and consciousness raising in myself on a volunteer basis because there's no money in it. And a lot of people say they don't volunteer for their health, but I actually do volunteer for my health because it's my own liberation. And my mentors are helping me with all this. And I appreciate my mentors. And I had one excellent mentor who I said, well, I'm white, right? He goes, that's the problem. There it is right there. And I said, what? What is it? Well, I didn't know about white identity because I didn't have to. I would pass all the time. And so then I had to find people who are willing to educate me at this deep level about how we're all racialized and what that means. And if we don't understand that, we're complicit in the problem. And again, I'd like to call out one mentor in particular, Kogiamon. And I have a lot of Native American mentors, and I appreciate Virgil's comments at the beginning. I'm really glad that he stretched out beyond what he was asked to do and made that very, very wonderful space, knowing that I've lived in Dakota country all my life. And so that's a big part of my mentors are all around and come right up, it comes right up out of the place and space that I'm at. And I hope that helps a little bit with answering the question. I have to do this for my own health and well-being, because if I don't become a part of a solution for this, I think we'll all perish.
What Carlisle said about white people talking to each other, I think is so important, and it's something that I'm going to commit my life to. We have to take the burden off people of color and talk to other white people about the fact that racism is here and it's powerful and it touches every life, and it affects down to the food that you're able to access, the water that you're able to access. This is a huge problem that's never going to go away if we don't do the daily work as white people to change our implicit bias within us, and also actually have the courage to talk to our families, and not just the MAGA hat wearers, but the liberals that still might reach out and try to touch a black woman's hair without consent, or you know, we have to talk to the people that are good too. So, and we really need to carry that burden as white people. It's not up to people of color to carry the burden to whip us into shape. We have to whip us into shape.
As a person of color, I personally have a big problem with the narrative or the idea of playing the good white person. Like, I think that if you recognize your privilege and your role in oppression and you want to take actions and you are taking actions, I think that's being a good human being, and I appreciate that kind of advocacy and allyship. And I don't think people should worry about playing the good white person unless you're not asking communities what they want and you're deciding what's good for them. But I don't think that people should worry about that who are white.
I know, but there's a mic right here.
Is it me?
Yep, it's you.
You know, I just want to say, as a white male living in a world of white privilege, it's a pretty good gig. You know, and so why would I give it up? And so my struggle, I mean, we're hearing some of the reasons, thank you, of why we would give it up. But my struggle is I have no vision of what a world without racism is for me. What's my place in a world with no racism? And as a person who spent my entire life in a world where I have privilege and I am in the group of people who does the oppressing, it's hard for me to imagine what my life is like without that. Because we talk about the problem and we talk about the world as it is now, but I don't hear people talking about what the world is without racism. And so the story I create in my head is I give up my power and I become oppressed. And why would I do that? You know, I worked for 20 years in a Native American agency, and a white person said to me at one point early on, you know, said, "Oh, it must be really interesting working with minorities." And my response to her was, I don't work with minorities. I am the minority at work. And I don't wish minority status on anyone. I don't like it. And so part of it is, how do I get to a place where there is no minority status? I don't have a context for what that vision is, and I don't hear a dialogue about what that looks like. That's what keeps me from moving forward.
If I might comment on that, there are places like that. You take like Cape Town, South Africa, right? When you walk around the streets of Cape Town, South Africa, you just have to give up your notion of identifying people by how they look, because they look like they're all over the place, right? But this thing about, and this is exactly why this vitriol is going on. There's a whole segment of society of people who look like you, right? Who don't see themselves in the future. And to some extent, it's a failure of imagination because you're privileged and you have, it's like writing, authors, you know. People of color, when they write and think of an audience, who they're writing for, it's a multicultural audience. Maybe it's like black or white and stuff like that. White writers don't have to do that, right? They just write to the powers they're in, right? And I think that drives a lack of imagination. And that's why I think we have a political class that can only rule and not solve problems because they can't imagine anybody but themselves, right? So in the long run, it will benefit nobody because the change is coming. And it's not by policy, there's just more dark people being born, right? You know what I mean? So you're gonna be a minority, just not in your job, right? And if you don't have privilege, then you know what? You might have to just like work for a living, you know? You might actually have to compete. Right? If everybody has a chance on an equal kind of platform, Because that's what this society has been, racism. It's been protectionism for white people. From day one, right? So, you know, you got a head start. Yeah, why should you give it up? Because in the nature of people surviving, sooner or later, one way or another, someone is going to take it from you. And we understand how that works, because they've been taking it from us from day one. I won't say no more, I'm sorry.
Along those lines, and to the last gentleman that spoke in the audience, I'm reminded of a film from just a few years ago called Cloud Atlas. Strange name, but you can find it on Netflix, Cloud Atlas. And the line from it that sticks with me is, "The weak are meat, and the strong do eat." And if you're going to live, another lining, if you live by the sword, you'll probably die by the sword. If you live by consuming other people or other cultures, someday you will be the one being consumed. I have a vision or a dream in my mind of a kind of universal solidarity. I mean, not of religion, not of language, not of culture, but that we are all human. We are all the same kind of being. We are all on this planet together. It's the only planet we have. I'm reminded of one of the images from the pipeline protest, a person wearing it was like a full length, and the words on it were, there are no jobs on a dead planet. You know, there is no health on a dead planet. I don't know how to achieve that kind of solidarity, but that's what we need. Thank you.
I think that for me, what I observe getting lost in all of this is the fact of racism as an economic engine in this country, and the human resource really that has gone to feed that and continues to feed that in the way that it reconstitutes itself on the bodies of real live human beings. So when we talk so much about our great nation and our American exceptionalism and just the reality of what's required for that. So that is the thing that I'm finding myself continually challenging. So how is it that you think we're so great? And just had a recent conversation with a brother of mine who was defending our founders, and that if we didn't do that, then we wouldn't have this great nation. And it's like, well, so maybe we don't deserve it. No, in fact, we don't deserve it, right? It's not even a maybe, but all of the mythology surrounded in all of it, and the way that we prop this up so that we don't have to see the truth about ourselves, and catching, feeling it in my chest, catching to call things white supremacy in conversation, in public, with white people, and the little gasp of breath, to say it out loud and then stand firm to have the conversation. That's the thing, right? Just the social consequence of saying these things out loud and risk, friends, whatever, scrutiny, whatever, discomfort, whatever, but to have to step into those shoes, and it's my conversation to have. But the money of it all that is today, has always been at the root and will continue, and seems to somehow escape scrutiny, is really fascinating to me. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Karen Herring, and I just want to thank you for this. It was deep and profound, and I want to thank you for opening the conversation, because so often it's easy for me as a cultural audience member to appreciate what's been done on the stage and then do my processing alone. And so for you to invite a white conversation about this, I think, is important. And I want to respond to the comment made about the comfort of being a white man in this world, and my own comfort of being a white woman. To to say that I think one of the learning, growing edges for me as a white person is to appreciate that one of the messages of whiteness is one of isolation. And to notice the pain of that as a white person, I think is the beginning of appreciating what we all have to gain by putting down white supremacy. That we have been taught, each of us of every color, that we can get by alone, and white people are especially vulnerable to this because in this system, it looks like we can, but we are losing our humanity. We are losing our ability to flourish as fellow people because we have lost our sense of community. And it's a huge tragedy that is taking its toll and being demonstrated in the number of white men that are mentally unstable. And I say this not just to the ones that are wielding guns, but the ones who are quietly suffering depression and unable to even name it. And I think when we begin to honor our need for one another, we will begin the deep interpersonal and personal transformation that we need in order to overcome white supremacy.
First of all, I kind of just want to acknowledge what she just said, because that was awesome. The first thing that kind of came to my mind was a shout out to my mom, who raised me in a household that doesn't conform to a single culture. Like, all my friends are amazed that I don't know, like, Superman, Batman, all these movies, I just don't know. And they're just like, you live in the United States. How do you not know these things? Like, that's all about our culture here. And I'm just like, well, I didn't watch TV, I read books. I didn't play these games, I rolled down the hill in my backyard. And so it gives me this huge opportunity to really open my mind to conversations like this with people that I don't know, because I don't know things going into it, so I don't have a pre-made notion of what I should be thinking. So it gives me a really good chance to mash different thoughts together to create an opinion that is mine. And I read a really good quote once. It was something along the lines of, gentleness can only be expected from the great, only the weak are cruel. And at first when I applied that to racism, I was like, well, white people aren't exactly gentle with us all the time. And then I was like, well, on the flip side, if you think about how white privilege is presented, it could be, you flip it around. Those of us that are of color, we are strong because we deal with those racist comments. We deal with what people say to us on the daily. And it is the white person that is weak because they don't put aside that white privilege and forget about it and remove themselves from that thought that they have that white privilege. And so at school we have something called student equity, where we're talking about white privilege. And we partnership with another school because my school is very much white. So there's a lot of unintentional racism that happens because nobody talks about it. Nobody says, you know, hey, that wasn't right. And so racism for teenagers really comes out through comedy. And it's like, well, I'm glad that you're trying to soften it, but, you know, it's still racist, dude. It's not okay. And so it's hard for us to be at that school because all of us are just like, we want to leave. Like, I shouldn't have to wait 15 years to sit in a room with only people of color. And, you know, I've got a white mom and a very brown dad. So I should be able to go out in public with either one of them and not have people think that you're adopted because you don't look like either one of them. And it's not right that I should be self-conscious of that. So, and the other thing that really happens is we villainize white people as people of color. It's not about the white person. It's about the privilege that they have. So it's really differentiating that white person is not a bad person. It's what they have that removes, like, rights that the rest of us have.
I see a, thank you for that. I see a couple of people raising their hands vigorously. People of color raising their hands vigorously. The reason for this is because, racism has been going on for a long time. We're steep in these things which are habits. They're just like knee jerks. You don't have to, it's like those dog whistles. You don't have to know exactly. Just the innuendo is enough. Right? So when the powerless speak to the powerful, that's really not quite a conversation, right? So the only thing we, as people of color, can say to white people is, and I know y'all got like y'all got a lot of shit to say, right? That you want to say, right? Is a construct of some kind of conversation. Do you know what you do to us? Right? It really, I'm not minimizing, but there's really not much more than that, right? We in this culture, when a black person speaks, they represent all black people. That's the way we see it, right? Right? So I would like to spare you that burden, right? Because, it is so ingrained in our culture. That's what it says. Oh, a black person stands up. And we become immediately representative of all black people. It's even difficult for you to speak for itself. And I don't really know how that really impinges on white people understanding their own self, all right? So I say that because it seems to me that when white people grapple with each other, we get a different kind of conversation, right? That's why I don't want people talking to me, right? Because it's easy for you to dream up an angry black man, right? You say something to me and I'll say, yo, whitey, goddamn it, you. And there we go again in that circular firing squad where we don't understand each other. So that's why I think for you people, there's value in listening and learning. But I'm not in control of you. If you have to speak, you can speak. So, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about white privilege. As a white person, I want to first just say it's real. And then I also want to interrogate the idea just a little bit, because when I experience privilege, it is very often something that seems like it shouldn't be a privilege. So for instance, when I walk with my son, nobody questions that we're a family. That shouldn't be a privilege. That's such a little piece of the fabric of life, right? If I get good service in a restaurant, it doesn't feel like a privilege until I look over and I see a family of color not getting good service, right? Then I have to realize that something that should just have been a normal interaction of life has turned out to be a privilege. And even on a bigger scale, my son was well served by the education system, especially compared to my friends of color and the kind of deep advocacy they have to do for their kids in school. That shouldn't be a privilege. And so I often think that the idea of white privilege, as hard as it is for some of us to hear, I think it lets us off the hook for saying white oppression, right? That we are oppressors. If we think something's a privilege, then we can get out of the idea that we're actually having our thumb on someone. So also, if I think of it as oppression, it's easier for me to let go of than privilege. So for instance, I don't have to get crappy service in a restaurant for my black sister over here to get good service, right? My son doesn't have to fail in school for children of color to succeed in school. The pie is not a pie, right? It's vast. So
thank you.
I could go right now? Okay. So I wanted to address the question asked first about the talking and why when black people talk very intelligently or, you know, with proper etiquette, why they're seen as, you know, some kind of thing. And I want to start off saying I'm an immigrant. I had an accent. And when I came here, I was told to learn English, and then I would be understood. But I didn't need to they didn't understand me. I understood them, and I was getting good grades, and they didn't understand that. And as I got older, I was in ELL for a very long time, and I learned that it was about the intelligence factor and fearing intelligence. Black people speak with Ebonics, AAV, so African American Vernacular, and it could be intertwined. So just because how we speak doesn't mean that's our intelligence, it's a dialect. So when they see that you can put your words together and formulate, and, you know, like make intelligent conversation, it's seen as a fear factor because the stereotype and the perceptions that they have of black people isn't one who's smart. It's exactly what we saw. You know, we're entertainment. We should know how to, you know, put language together and use it to be understood. So when we do speak formally and properly, as they say, it's seen as, oh my God, they must be smarter than me, or where did you get your education from? You know, as a freshman in college, my first, you know, semester, a white man came up to me and said, "You speak so much better than I thought you would." And I was like, what does, you know, like, you know, I checked him and I was like, well, that's funny because I grew up here and I got an American education, so what do you expect? Did you think I was supposed to not have a good education? You know, and he basically tried to make it seem as, because I talk so well and I did so well, that's why I got into school. And it's like, I worked my butt off to get into school. It wasn't because, you know, so it's more, I think it's more of the, because you're black, you should speak and act like what a black person looks like. It's not more of the intelligence. We're not on the same level. So I think that's where it comes from. That's all.
Thank you.
Hello and good morning. This is my first time at this amazing conference. I want to thank everyone for putting it on. Earlier, there was a question as to, don't know as to how it is, you know, not living with white privilege. I come from a place where I never heard about white privilege. We never talked about white identity or anything like that. I come from the state of Hawaii where I was born and raised. I moved from Hawaii to Minnesota 18 years ago. And my husband, who is white, we were having a conversation last night, and he said that he never thought of us as being a biracial couple. In Hawaii, everyone is auntie, uncle, or cousin. That's just the way that it is. Everyone goes and they support each other's community, whether it's the Japanese, the Filipino, the Hawaiians, the Samoans, you just go. We have a famous comedian from Hawaii who was supposed to go to the seminary, but he found comedy and he thought that was the best way for it. His name is Frank DeLima. In fact, my husband said, you should bring Frank DeLima's tape and play it for everyone. In his comedy act, where a lot of people go to, he makes fun of all the races. But we do not laugh at each other, we laugh with each other. And that's just the difference. Moving to Minnesota was just so different. Then I lived in Duluth, and that was even more different, where I was called in to the managing attorney's office and told to stop asking my secretary if she was doing anything fun this weekend, because it was an invasion of her privacy, which is so different from where I grew up, because everyone supports each other and everyone works with each other. We have a saying, 808 represent. 808 is our area code. And if you are from Hawaii and you're living here in Minnesota and I find out about you, I'm going to track you down and let you know about the various different people that we have living here. We have a group of people called Frozen Ohana. So we get together and we don't know each other, but it's like, hey auntie, or hey uncle, and we're like, what's auntie's first name? What does uncle do? What about cousin? So you can have that dialogue in the conversation, but it does start with everyone. But I never knew about diversity until moving to Minnesota. And I moved here because my husband got tired of 80 degrees and blue skies year-round. So, but I just wanted to say that this is just an amazing conference. We just need to keep talking about it and keep working and supporting each other with it. You don't need to come up to ask me, how do you get an invitation to go to a powwow? Just go and support and be respectful.
I am really thrilled to be here because all of my life I have noticed all the racism actually going on. In the 60s, when I went to high school, I was the white privilege. The country club did not let Jewish or black people in. Then during the integration things, I got very involved and active. And by the time my children were in junior high, I saw institutional discrimination in action and ran for school board. We're dividing into a new high school. They put all the poorer neighborhood into the old high school. They put computers, books, and all white children in the new high school. I ran for school board. I was not successful, but I became an activist. And the final blow to my hopes, 12 years ago I had a granddaughter, and my stepfather, who I'm not close with, said, how does it feel to have a black granddaughter? So I remain committed to everyone that I run into making sure my dialogue happens. And I really appreciate all of you being here because you're younger and you can carry on.
What resonated for me, and this was kind of early on in the presentation here, was how this represented my own socialization. So I am of that generation in which you saw those cartoons and how that socialized me. And, you know, so how I laughed at that, how that was extremely funny without any understanding of what the racism that was embedded there that I was taking in. So I can name those cartoons. These are shown in Los Angeles in the summertime. So part of the entertainment. Then in the 1950s, we would find it on the television, the movies of the 1930s, and how that is all taken into ourselves, that socialization. So when you spoke, and I took it as a disparaging way of the quiet, black, educated person who was sitting and dressing like the brothers, in a way I was saying, well, that's me. You know, I'm from Compton, Willowbrook, Watts, lower income, working class family, but yet that's me. And so sounding in one way, being another, and like the image up on the screen, having this white mask on, and I'm just wondering, I just wonder about all of the complexity of that. You know, the notion of dealing with, I cannot be in this culture without internalizing those cartoons. There's no way, because, you know, that's precognitive. And so what does that do to me? The complexity that is within me. So I don't have an answer for that, but I am in deep sympathy for that brother there in the back, sitting with the other brothers, trying to find his place, And I know that others can identify with this, trying to find his place, but that place is very complex.
I think this is I think this is it. I want to thank you very much about that. I mean, it's the first time I've had a comment about that because, you know, the consequences, I mean, I guess, I'm glad you said that you got it. You know, that the consequences, this thing all becomes a loop, right? And then even black people fall into that loop. And it is, yeah, and it's cognitive and it's deeply complicated, right? It's also complicated for black people talking to each other, right? I mean, that's why we go to our own camp, because we spend so much time talking to you. Do we forgot to talk about each other? I mean, to talk to each other. I just came from a workshop with writers in another country, in France, writers from Africa and writers from, and when we offered this residency to these artists so that they would not have a white filter, you know, saying, oh, well, what does that mean, or what do you think, or what is that, or judging them and stuff like that. And it was a totally different conversation. I mean, first we had to learn to talk to each other because the opportunity didn't prevail itself, right? So there's like you know, there's this conversation about like, if you think you got it, then you're really deep, right? If you think, oh, well, you know, I'll walk down there. It's got to be a long journey because like the brother said, it's cognitive. You know, people think about how to like seep that into your mind. It's like Lakoff says, you know, when you say elephant, you see an elephant. You don't have to work, your mind just does that. So thank you so much, brother. Thank you. And thank you all. Great conversation. Great. Keep it up.
If you could just hold on, we'll be leaving in a second. Just a couple more announcements. So I know we're all eager to be thinking about lunch. Oh, I don't have my mic on. All right, hang on. There we go. Yeah, just so a couple of things, and we'll be ready to head out. Again, big thank you to Carlisle for your wonderful presentation. So I was, just a little confession, I was looking at my smartphone to kind of keep an eye on the time where we were, and up popped a news feed from the Huffington Post, and it's titled, Idaho Elementary Teachers Dressed Up as Mexicans and the Border Wall for Halloween. Minstrel shows. I think it's also, as another little bit of segue, I think it's clear to most of us that our current president is seeking with every tweet that he puts out that this current election is, in his mind, is about white supremacy, and to be fearful of brown-skinned people coming across our borders or brown-skinned people having babies. That's the issue as he's framed it. And it's about a zero-sum game in which white people lose if people of color gain. And we've heard some strong voices reminding us this morning that those of us who are white have much to gain, not lose, by being engaged in seeking the kind of world we all desire. One of the ways to do that, we've got a poster to be sharing with you, and I was asked to make this announcement. A local artist, part of the Million Artists Movement, made posters and brought them for everyone to take. They're on the free resource table in the registration area, and they show in large print and image, vote, create, impact. So I'd invite you, encourage you to take one of those with you when you leave this morning. Finally, an invitation again, it's been made before, I'd make it again, if you're interested in participating in FREC, this collaborative that is putting on this conference. There is a monthly meeting held at the next one that we will immediately begin planning next year's conference. It's going to be held at St. Paul's United Church of Christ on, it's always on the second Thursday, and the next one's at St. Paul's United Church of Christ on Summit Avenue, November 15th, 9 to 11. Now, if that time doesn't work for you, there are also other committees that is, in which you can be involved that meet at other times. So just, you can get information on the FREC website if you're interested, and we'd love to have your participation. I think that's it for this morning. It's been wonderful having you all here, those that are in this room and those that are in other spaces. Lunches are available in the Great Hall. Have a fantastic afternoon.